what is actually happening in the world of sport.
Yeah, we'll kick off with the news that's kind of permeated the world over the last week or so. Liverpool players have taken the knee in a message of support following the killing of African-American George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis. 29 Reds players gathered in the centre circle during training at Anfield yesterday. Manchester United pair Paul Pogba and Marcus Rashford have added their voices to the worldwide protests against racism. Six-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, has been critical of the slow response of his fellow drivers to speak out, saying, "I see those of you who are staying silent." And meanwhile, it's been mentioned already this morning, but Irish athlete Gina Akpe-Moses says there is a level of hidden racism here in Ireland. Born in Lagos in Nigeria, Gina was raised in Dundalk and now lives in London. She spoke with our own Arthur O'D over the weekend. That full interview, as we've said, is on otbsports.com. Well worth getting that article for you this morning. The Premier League's top referees are hoping to take charge of a series of friendly matches over the next 2 weeks to help them return to competitive action. Talks are underway on how they could officiate the games at biosecure training facilities. The top flight is, of course, due to return on the 17th of June. Meanwhile, some decent news for Manchester United fans over the weekend as well. From a playing perspective, Nigerian forward Odion Ighalo has extended his loan deal until January of next year. He joined on loan from Chinese Super League club Shanghai Shenhua at the beginning of this year and has scored a few goals in the games he has started thus far. Meanwhile, Queen's Park Rangers have said they are appalled by plans to restart the English Championship season on June 20th. The London club's players have yet to return to full contact training. Their chief executive, Lee Hoyce, says there has been absolutely no consultation with individual clubs, nor with the Championship Doctors Working Group by the divisional representatives or anyone else in the Football League regarding the matter. An FAI council member, Nixon Morton, has complained to FIFA and UEFA over areas under the current governance of the association. Morton is the schools representative on the council. He's written to the world and European bodies to raise issues around the expansion of independent directors on the FAI board from 4 to 6 and the mandatory retirement of council members that have served for 10 years. To rugby news this morning, lads, the IRFU have requested that their 217 clubs create roles for COVID-19 safety and compliance officers on a voluntary basis. Physical contact sports will be allowed to permit full contact training from August 10th under the current government roadmap. Claire Williams admits the poor performance on track in recent seasons has prompted Williams to look for further investment. They've finished last in the Formula One Constructors' Championship for the past 2 years, where they have also lost their title sponsor. Despite those issues, Williams insists the future of the F1 team is not in jeopardy. Following a successful meeting at Newcastle yesterday, horse racing continues its return today, both there and indeed at Kempton Park. Zodiacos wrote his name into the record books with a win yesterday in the first race in Britain since the sport's last event on March the 17th. Legendary jockey Frankie Dettori is amongst the riders that go later as he teams up with Galsworthy for trainer John Gosden. And finally, some snooker back as well indeed, lads. The Championship League was the first sports event in the UK to be shown free to air since the easing of restrictions, with an on-site hotel in Milton Keynes allowing players to isolate before play. World champion Judd Trump, one of those in action yesterday. He had to isolate for 18 hours after being given a COVID-19 test at 4 o'clock on Sunday. With Trump, along with the tournament's 7 other players and 35 staff working at the venue, returning a negative result. Play began yesterday and continues indeed today.
All right, Shane, good stuff. Thanks very much for that. We'll get to your comments rolling in. Somebody suggesting Moss Keane for Mount Rushmore. Haven't heard his name mentioned once. Eoin.
Yeah, we should have asked Micheál about that, actually, about that game that you may have heard about where Munster beat the All Blacks. Moss Keane was a part of that. Little known tale there from the annals of Irish sport, which I can bring people up to speed on whenever they like.
Mick Galway, obviously, an All-Ireland winner and multiple tens of, was he 50 caps, 60 caps? About that for Ireland? Maybe a bit less. Mm-hmm. But, you know, no hint of that. You hate rugby, is that it? Is that what's going on here? Even though you're now officially a rugby man, you've kind of regressed to your pre-Dublin era cariness. Is that what's going on?
Well, like, I mean, I'm going to be making cases for both of these people.
Okay.
And it will happen before the day is out. They're two absolute legends, no question.
From Bazzaroni, that is. Keep the comments and ideas rolling in. 087 180 180 is the WhatsApp number, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube channel. Time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
Okay, so OTBsports.com this morning, the other face of Roy Keane is Colin Buig's story about a Roy Keane jersey that hangs proudly in his house. It was replacing a Roy Keane jersey that he was wearing when he had an accident on holidays in Spain, a pretty horrific accident that nearly cost him his life. Obviously, he lived to tell the tale, and he's lived to tell the tale brilliantly on otbsports.com, which is the website this morning. Also there is that piece that we've been talking about where Gina Akpia-Moses has spoken with Arthur O'Dea. Why is there a black girl on the Irish team is the title for that. This has got a lot of response over the weekend. And I think with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, it would be important for us to reflect on ourselves as a country and how well we treat minorities in this country. And not very well is the answer. Obviously, I think if we're all being truthful about that. So that's on the website. At the moment, Liverpool squad shows solidarity with George Floyd on Anfield pitch, and Frankie Dettori will ride for Aidan O'Brien in the 2000 Guineas. Lewis Hamilton also coming out saying that the Formula One response to the George Floyd killing has been conspicuous by its absence.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with that FAI story that Shane mentioned a moment ago. Titanic battle for soul of football, reads the headline. FAI Council member Morton warns UEFA and FIFA that outside forces are taking over. So interesting stuff in this. As Shane mentioned, he's warned that a titanic battle for the heart and soul of football in our own country is imminent, because the terms of the interim FAI board's rescue deal with the government will result in a loss of sovereignty that is unique amongst the 211 FIFA nations. Also on the back page of the Irish Independent, you've got a picture there of runners and hiders, eyes on the prize at Newcastle. That is Kerry native and England's reigning champion jockey Oisin Murphy preparing to canter his mount down to the start at Newcastle yesterday. And the other story here, written by Keane Tracy, clubs begin search for volunteer COVID-19 officers as IRFU published summary roadmap. So Irish rugby clubs up and down the country have begun their search for COVID-19 safety officers to oversee public health measures in the club, as well as a COVID-19 compliance officer to monitor day-to-day compliance with protocols across all teams. So the wheels are very much in motion for return to playing rugby at the moment.
The Irish Times this morning, FAI Council member raises concerns about governance of organisation. That's the letter that Nixon Morton has written to FIFA and UEFA about concerns about potential outside controls. They're also talking about an increase in membership for adapting golf clubs and Kick It Out, urging Premier League players to take a knee. So it's going to be interesting to see just how these protests spread around the world.
The Irish Examiner this morning leads with Davy Fitzgerald's latest comments about GAA clubs having their gates closed. John Fogarty writes, open GAA pitches to help people's mental health, pleads Fitzgerald. He does not believe the GAA authorities are giving enough consideration to the mental health of its members by keeping pitches closed. And this seems to be a debate that's intensifying as the weeks go by. You've got that FAI story there as well. Board set to discuss that critical letter sent by Council member Morton. Knockout might help Cork end All-Ireland famine, says McGrath. So this is Shawnee McGrath, who reckons a knockout championship could add to Cork's chances of landing an All-Ireland hurling title later this year. You might be able to say the same for everybody in Munster. Perhaps the Munster Championship would be less of a burden on those coming through that province. Black Lives, that being said, you do have the last two All-Ireland winners coming from Munster, so perhaps that point of the round robin actually not being advantageous to them maybe doesn't actually make that much sense. And Black Lives Matter, Black culture matter, black communities matter, we matter. This is Marcus Rashford amongst the quotes there in that piece on the Irish Examiner.
The London Times for you this morning, and they have Hamilton called out F1 over racism. So that's Lewis Hamilton's Instagram posts, and eventually 9 of Hamilton's 19 fellow F1 drivers had added their support to his stance yesterday, including 3 younger drivers, Charles Leclerc, George Russell and Alex Albon, who admitted they'd been unsure how to articulate their feelings on the subject. Racing's big return hit by horse death. So racing yesterday became the first major sport to take place in Britain since the coronavirus outbreak in March, but obviously hit by the death of a horse over the course of it.
The Irish Daily Mail this morning leads with that photograph there of Liverpool stars joining race protest. The main story, club split on new rules. Plans to bring in multi-ball system, increase subs to 5 and re-register players leads to dissent in Premier League ranks. So the league facing dissent from several clubs over a number of these proposed changes. Sportsmail has learned that plans to increase the number of subs from 3 to 5 to allow clubs to re-register players not named in their squad in January and to introduce a multi-ball system all have detractors. And there's also going to be unhappiness, they write, at some clubs about the Premier League's unwillingness to reconsider the use of VAR course, VAR would be the cockroach that comes crawling out from beneath the fridge at the end of COVID-19 when it comes to football debates. But there is some unwillingness to reconsider the use of VAR, which FIFA ruled last month could be abandoned for the rest of the campaign. So get ready for more VAR chat next month when football comes back. And FAI council member blasts FAI, writes Philip Quinn.
And the Irish Sun, back page there, is a recipe for disaster. Ferdinand injury fears over restart plan. Les Ferdinand fears the bombshell plan to restart the championship in just 18 days poses a bigger risk to players than COVID-19. Figures that they won't be ready physically for it. Book on track. Bookies reported a bumper turnover as racing got back on track at Newcastle yesterday. United 10 million to extend Iggy Stop. There you go, you get it, Iggy Stop. Manchester United are forking out 10 million to extend Odi Nagalo's stay until the end of January. It's a lot of money, but I suppose if he's working for them, and he seems to be, then it's kind of irrelevant. If you're Man United, you can afford it. And top flight travel all up in air. Premier League clubs are still in the dark about comeback procedures just 15 days before the return of top flight football. Some teams fear their players could be forced into 12-hour road trips to maintain social distancing. And the UK government guidelines published on Saturday have only added to the travel confusion. A lot of, I don't know, did you see that, Owen? A lot of concern that essentially the British government had banned sex over the course of the weekend, accidentally, maybe on purpose, who knows?
They accidentally banned it. I actually missed this. Is this like the opposite of the time the Irish government accidentally legalised was it just ecstasy or was it all drugs? It was a good range.
It was a good range, okay, fair enough. Because I remember, didn't Blind Boy go on Tom Dunn that night and take yokes? Or was it something else?
Back.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Yeah, so essentially it was like gatherings of people were not going to be allowed. Essentially, you couldn't go around to somewhere and have sex. And it was like, well, obviously the family gatherings are going to preclude that from happening. And there was a lot of back and forth, pardon the pun, about this on social media over the course of the last 36 hours or so. I'm surprised you missed it.
God, the United States really picked the wrong weekends to grab the international headlines, and what we could have been talking about this morning at 7:30 could have been something far more important. Back page of the Irish Daily Star this morning is cabin fever. Premier League stars could be made to change in prefab huts as part of measures. FAI face another headache. This is the latest in the FAI leadership and the letter that's been written. Davy says county return safer. Wexford hurling boss Davy Fitzgerald thinks inter-county games should be played before club games in 2020, and signs are good for racing after its return in Newcastle yesterday.
He's not the first person just recently to say that, Davy Fitz. What do you think of it?
It made relative sense at the start that the idea of bringing club action back before inter-county action was a bit fanciful. It makes sense that you would want that to happen, but there's just a multitude of them. It's exponentially larger, the number of players and clubs that would be involved. There's less facilities that tend to be available to club players, less resources. It would be less safe, you would have thought. A smaller pool of people would be more safe. But the thing is, they're both amateur players, and if you're going to play something in a compact fashion and try and get the groundswell of people on your side and playing club games, probably makes more sense. But I don't know, like maybe you start at the top and you work your way down, and maybe starting inter-county games actually makes more sense there. But John Horan has been pretty clear on this. The club is going to come first.
I have no mirror this morning. If we've got a PDF, we can stick that up. If we don't, we can move on. Oh, there you go. Unity of strength. Sancho's message sparked wave of support for George Floyd protests. The new place for football, Prem starts to change in porta cabins, and the new face of racing with masks as well.
The Guardian this morning leads with blueprint for change. Women's game must cast off the shackles of the FA to thrive after this crisis. This is obviously a lot going on with the WSL in the UK at the moment. A photograph there of Manchester City fans at the Etihad Stadium for their game against Arsenal in February. That is the Guardian this morning. Also, a couple of other stories at the inside. Back on the bays, the new normal hits Milton Keynes, and RFL's £1 million Ashes up in flames after series is cancelled. The Telegraph back page there is a picture from the racing yesterday at Newcastle.
Horse death casts shadow over racing's big return. How do United fit Pogba and Fernandes into the same team? Maybe they don't. And clubs fury at championship start dates. The clubs think that it's coming back too soon. 3 Charlton players are refusing to play because they're out of contract. That's the Liverpool players taking a knee yesterday. Liverpool and Rashford lead the support for Floyd protests. People are hurting, Black Lives and culture matter. That's the Marcus Rashford comment. And no rerun can beat the thrill and anticipation of not knowing the outcome. Yeah, a lot of these games that are going to come thick and fast, a lot of people aren't going to be that interested in many of them because a lot of them won't be very good games. There's a lot of... It's funny, the situation that we're in now where we're watching back some of the best games from previous eras, and I know there's been some criticism of the standard of play in those games, but now we see every game. If you want to, you can literally watch any Premier League match that you want, and sometimes the standard of them is overwhelmed by the fact that it's available. Too much of anything is too much of something.
Yeah, like there's 2 things here, and maybe in a second, if we have time, I would like to come to the defence of classic games because they've actually got a bit of a battering over recent weeks. Like I see Eamon Sweeney was destroying it into something independent at the weekend, and I can see the point largely, but we'll come back to that in a sec. But just on the Premier League thing, I hear what you're saying, and I can see how the percentage of games being watched by people with a decent interest in the Premier League will just dwindle as time goes by. Even when it comes to the main prize in the Premier League, that is the least interesting thing. We want to be watching relegation-threatened teams. If Manchester City's ban gets upheld, we want to be watching the race for the top 4 or the top 5. They'll be exciting, but really, what is that? 20% of the games? After that, you could have a situation where teams might actually start resting players because the turnover into the next season is going to be so short.
Yeah. Well, there still will be enough prize money at stake, but like you have to explain that to the manager, and then the players have to really care about finishing 13th as opposed to 17th. Okay, 17th is not good, but 15th.
No, 17th is okay. 17th is good.
Fair point. Yeah, I mean you'd be sweating it a little bit.
A small bit, but yeah, like Liverpool winning the Premier League, nobody is watching that. Nobody's watching Liverpool when we come back with the sense of the unexpected. It is a procession. We will watch the final game, and we would like to see how they react because it's going to be weird when they win the Premier League in front of an empty stadium.
Unless they've been eating like banana bread for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like a few of us have, you know, and they're out of condition somewhat. That would be interesting. You know.
Imagine if that happened. Like, imagine if Liverpool bottled the Premier League from here. It would actually be the most insane thing that happened in 2020, which is actually saying quite something. It would be beyond funny at this point. Like, but it's obviously not going to happen. And like, I'd be kind of hopeful for like a decent bit of excitement when it comes to the top 4 in the relegation. That crazy things can happen when games are compressed together. It'll feel like World Cup afternoons when you have like 4 or 5 games on. And you know, I've got no issue with that, and I'm all for having everything available to people, and then them making their own choice on whether or not they want to watch it. And everything is going to be available for Premier League fans over the next couple of weeks. But just on the classic game point, just because it sparked something in me over the course of the weekend, where I was like, they have got a bit of a bashing, haven't they? Or is it just me?
No, no. It's been out there. All these games are rubbish. Like, really, they're not. I mean, they really aren't. Like,
but it's that's not so much my angle. My angle on it is the idea of classic games as a whole, about the idea of watching back games that you know the result in. And I can see the point that it takes away something when you don't have suspense, that sport is pointless without that suspense, when you do know who is going to win the game or what the result is going to be. But I'm not sure would I go along with the fact that it is totally pointless without that. I think there is still a huge value in watching back old games. Like, if we are going to hold sport to such a high standard that it is akin to art, then it should be immune to the idea of spoilers or knowing what the outcome is going to be or knowing who is going to score the winning goal. We can actually refer to sport as an art form, which we sometimes do. If that is not hyperbole, then we should be able to watch back these games, know the result, and still marvel at what is happening. And especially for the last 2 weeks when we've done our classic game clubs and stuff, I've got so much enjoyment from watching the Istanbul final last week, from watching Juventus against Manchester United in full for the first time. Like, I watched it in full at the first time. Not a single iota of recollection from it. We've seen all these parts in different clips down through the years, but actually watching these things back in full, getting to appreciate just how good Zinedine Zidane was in the late 90s, getting to appreciate just how good Roy Keane was in the late 90s. This is what sport is about appreciating individual brilliance at times, and to say, these don't matter because we know that Manchester United are going to win the treble that year is actually a ridiculous argument if you are a fan of sport. Now, if you don't like sport and you say, well, it's all about who wins at the end of the day, then fair enough, you're onto something. But for me, sport means a hell of a lot more than just who wins at the end.
Yeah, and look, I actually, you benefit from watching it again, because when all you're interested in is the suspense and drama of what the outcome is going to be, you don't pick up on how a team actually asserted itself, particularly over a long period of time. Did you, for example, before The Last Dance, did you rate Michael Jordan as highly as you rated LeBron James?
It's a good point. Like, I always thought LeBron was the GOAT because I think people get better and better over time. But if you are being relative, then no, it definitely hammers home that fact that Michael Jordan is the GOAT.
And essentially, that was just a montage of games where it was an explainer about he did this, he did this, he did this, and 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 he did this, again and again and again and again, six times in big playoffs. And even to get to the playoffs, sometimes he had to do it in unbelievable circumstances. So that was essentially a glorified 10-part classic game club. And I was like, okay, actually, you know what? This is important because it's history. This isn't just sitting down and mindlessly watching a game again. It's actually watching it from the vantage point of today, where you get to go and piece things back and see the evolution of styles of play. And I think I thought it was pretty interesting. So.
And there is also an element of agony that goes with this. You may not have suspense, but like the first classic game club we did back in January was Kerry against Dublin in 2013. That was painful. It's still painful. If you are a supporter of one of the teams and you end up watching your team lose again and again and again, it is a form of self-torture. So it isn't without its emotion. Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to say that. I've only got one newspaper this morning left. It's the Irish News. A whole new game that's jockeys in using social distancing measures in the parade ring at Newcastle yesterday. And Team Ulster idea, a non-runner, says Antrim star McManus. So this is Neil McManus, the Antrim hurler, who says, what would happen if Antrim, if 9 or 10 of the lads are away playing for Team Ulster, it would genuinely scare me. So probably makes sense for all of the other counties in Ulster to have this team, but Antrim may have designs in the future of them being their own independent powerhouse once again.
Well, I mean, prove it. That's the thing. Like, you've had 4 decades of farting around to get your house in order and you haven't managed to do it. So the time to prove that was over the last period of time when you are on your own, but actually have not managed somehow to mobilise the resources of the giant population that you have and the tradition of hurling that you have. So I think, like, unless absolutely radical measures are taken to protect and invest in hurling in Antrim and in the 6 counties, and like I can't see Monaghan contributing. I can't see, maybe some Donegal hurlers might be interested. I don't know if it's a full 9 counties province or if it is actually, are we talking about, obviously you can't have a 6 counties qualification because that would be recognising partition, which you couldn't do.
Yeah, that would be the biggest irony in the history of the GAA, were there to be a 6 counties team, really.
Something you'd suggest, Eoin.
Where had we, like, obviously the Antrim story kind of comes up time and time again. It seemed that it wasn't in an amazingly good place even before this crisis, but I wonder, is this the sort of never failed to make use of a crisis sort of situation where the county is suffering and Antrim with its resources can now turn something into a bit of a positive after all of this? Like, it just always seemed like the biggest untapped market in the GAA, especially when it just comes to pure success.
Yeah. Look, I definitely feel like there's the bones of a good hurling team there, and I think that if you were, for example, to put combined schools teams in the national schools competitions, then all of a sudden those players would have some experience. They did this essentially with Dublin, and then over a period of time, you break up that school into that school's regional side into smaller regional school sides, but it takes massive investment and it takes massive commitment from loads and loads of people, and at the moment, I don't know if that leadership exists, and you can kind of see the difficulties that they've had around the stadium issue in Belfast. So, like, I don't know, we should definitely do something about this over the next while, because I think it's certainly, it's a bit of an open scab at the moment, the way that hurling has deteriorated so quickly, in Antrim in particular.
Yeah, it is. You would definitely can't make a case against it not being a bad thing for everybody involved, really. And it's just almost, it seems that Casement Park just hammered this thing home. It really is just like salt in the wound of what this is, seeing this actual resource just lying idle at the moment, weeds growing literally on the pitch where there should be great teams playing. It's sad to see, and I don't know, hopefully at the end of this, things will start moving in the right direction for everybody involved there.
I can do the Herald for you to wrap this one up now. Outside forces will own the FAI. This is the letter that has been sent to UEFA and FIFA by a member of the FAI's senior council. A loss of sovereignty that will be unique among the 211 FIFA nations, which is, shows good knowledge of what's going on in the other 210 FIFA nations. Nixon Morton, a member of the FAI Schools National Executive, a number of my senior council colleagues and other members across football are very concerned by what is happening to the game in Ireland under the stewardship of the existing interim board. Outside forces now have ownership of the game. This is very interesting. I mean, I love when people complain about, I've talked to loads of other people about this and they feel the same as me. They're just not saying it. I'm like, well, let's see it from them. Let's have them also. If you're the ringleader, then I'm sure you've got agreement for them to put their names to it too. That's not to say there aren't issues with the existing interim board. I'm sure there are, and you can be sure that there are all sorts of heaves. And as you said earlier on about never letting a good crisis go to waste, there are undoubtedly forces within the FAI who see this as a big opportunity to seize power, and you obviously want to keep an eye on what's going on there, and so we will over the next while as well. I just want to tell you, tomorrow morning on OTB AM, Floyd Landis is going to join us to look back at the second episode of the Lance Armstrong documentary. It wrapped up in the States over the course of the weekend, and the second episode is an hour and 40 minutes. Again, it's quite whistle stop. There's like there's loads of little nuggets in it, but there's large elements of it that you're left feeling a little bit queasy about a lack of detail, or even a lack of an up-to-date perspective from people who would be super critical of Lance. He does most of the job himself. I think that's kind of the point here, is that they've allowed Lance to essentially tell his own story, and you are then left to make up your mind about whether or not you think he is a credible witness after all these years of being a literally incredible witness, where he is a self-confessed liar, and the scale of the lie and the ability to tell those lies. I'm not going to give any of the spoilers away before people actually see this, because it's on BT tonight. But the opening question is like, do you feel you want to be relevant again, or is it like, are you doing all this to be relevant? And there's a long pause, and he just says, I am relevant. I was like, okay, right. Look, here's the thing. Maybe he is. Maybe he is. We were watching it last night, and was like, has he found God? My wife asked, I was like, no, but Jesus, that's a great idea. If Lance Armstrong found God, I guarantee you, he would be electable.
It's the one missing link. Like, I mean, nothing could be too absurd in terms of trying to suggest anybody could become presidential. But like, it is interesting when you say that. Like, we were obviously quite harsh on the documentary last week, because, as you say, it does feel kind of whistle stop. We knew 95% of the details we were getting shown, which is always a little bit dissatisfying. But as you say, like, when you've got that much Lance, he's going to David Brent himself at some point, where he is going to say something that makes him look ridiculous, or it reminds you of why he is such kind of an unpalatable character in world sport.
Yeah, and there's plenty of that, so enjoy it if you haven't seen it. But this week we're releasing some of the best pieces from the OTB Gold archives around the Lance Armstrong story right now in the OTB Podcast Network. You'll find some great stuff. An Emma O'Reilly interview. She features in the second episode. Betsy Andreu. We had Betsy on the following week when Emma was in talking about her book. We had Tyler Hamilton in studio, as well as the piece we did last week on OTB AM. And David Walsh of the Sunday Times talking about Team Sky in December 2016. We'll be posting more during the week too, into highlights from Off the Ball. And you'll also find these over on Off the Ball on otbsports.com/podcasts. Ger Gilroy Muhammad Ali interview, Sunday paper review, World Cup recap. They were looking back at 1994, and great GA rivalries, Limerick against Clare, which is where we're turning now as this week on the Saturday panel, John Duggan caught up with James O'Connor of Clare and Limerick's Joe Quaid to look back on their great rivalry of the 1990s. Have a quick look.